Good morning. We're in the book of John, chapter 18. If I can get there. We've been looking, we're at the trial of Jesus, getting toward the crucifixion. And I have it marked here where we left off, verse 28. Yes, because we left off kind of a new paragraph there. We were talking about Peter denying Jesus and Jesus restoring Peter and this special message, go and tell the disciples and Peter that he is risen. Verse 28 picks up here. They led Jesus from Caiaphas unto the hall of judgment. Of course, this would be the praetorium. If you remember from, it was last Sunday night, right? Yes. Last Sunday night's book of the month, talking about Mark writing more generally, at least to Romans or a non-Jewish audience. He gives us the Roman or Latin reference to that, the praetorium, but same thing, judgment hall, praetorium. They led Jesus from Caiaphas unto the hall of judgment, and it was early, and they themselves went not into the judgment hall, lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover. I've always found that so ironic. There are a couple of times, a few different times within the context of Jesus' trial, that the Jews are going to be concerned about defiling themselves, or they're suddenly concerned about obeying Roman law. They're suddenly Roman patriots. They're going to cry out, "We have no king but Caesar." A Jew would never say such a thing unless they wanted to accomplish their evil desire, which was to kill Jesus. So you talk about a situation of what we might call situational ethics. Some of these same people, had somebody said, "We have no king but Caesar," had any other Jew said that, they would have rebuked them and told them what an evil thing that was to say. No, Caesar's not our king. God is our king. But here, they want to accomplish their purposes, and so they're not going into the judgment hall lest they defile themselves, and yet they're going to plead and eventually accomplish, of course, the crucifixion of the Son of God. Every time I read verse 28, you just sort of shake your head because it's so hypocritical. We're not going into that judgment hall. We got to be able to eat the Passover. We have to stay ceremonially clean. They were anything but clean in all of this matter with the trial and crucifixion of Jesus. So they lead Jesus to the judgment hall. This is Jesus before Pilate, of course. John gives this a lot more space than the other gospel account writers. There are some details still that are missing in John's account. He gives us a lot of detail. There are the repeated accusations by the priest. John doesn't go into all that. The trip to Herod and back, John doesn't mention that. The stirring up of the crowds. So some things are mentioned here by John in more detail. Some things are omitted. Again, that's not because John is forgetful or he's not using the same source or whatever. It's just that's God, the Holy Spirit, choosing certain things to include and certain things not. And obviously this one, the book of John, if you all the way back to our introduction, written later than the other gospel accounts, and so there's a lot more selective material that's going to be included. Very selective in what he includes. In fact, that's one of the evidences for the inspiration of the book of John, because John is so selective. There are certain things where any normal writer would have satisfied the reader's curiosity or elaborated on something, and John just includes it and moves on. Go ahead, Brother Scott. Right. Yeah, John tells us if everything were to be included, there's no, he tells us he's being very selective in what he writes, because the last few verses of the book, he says, the world couldn't contain all the books that'd be written if you wrote everything. It's interesting. I read somebody who said, and I think this is a good point. This record and John's recording of this, of course, inspired by the Holy Spirit, it seems designed to bring the personalities of Jesus and of Pilate into focus and contrast, of course. One fellow said it's really a trial of Pilate before Jesus. I think that's a pretty interesting way of looking at it. The world thinks they have Jesus on trial, and really Jesus has Pilate on trial. He's not there to try him, to condemn him or anything, but really this is showing Pilate's character, and it doesn't portray him very well. Maybe perhaps not quite as bad as those Jewish leaders who are really instigating him and the crowd, but it's not a pretty picture of Pilate either. He goes out, verse 29 says, "And what accusation bring you against this man?" There are some things about Pilate that are interesting here. He's reluctant to do anything. You're going to see this as we go on, of course. He's reluctant to do anything. You see the trips in and out of the praetorium. It seems like he's, out of his reluctance, he's trying to, I don't know if he's thinking maybe if I delay this long enough, they'll just shut up and leave me alone. I don't know. But he's very reticent to pronounce execution upon Jesus. In fact, he's going to pronounce Jesus' innocence on a couple of different occasions, putting all the gospel accounts together. He's going to seek to release Jesus. Verse 39? Will you therefore that I release unto you the King of the Jews? He says, you have a custom, I should release to you a prisoner. How about Jesus? And of course they're going to say, no, we don't want him. Release Barabbas, whom everybody knew was a robber. But he seeks to release Jesus, Pilate does. He scourges Jesus in an apparent attempt to appease the crowd and prevent crucifixion. He's reluctant to do this for whatever reason. Maybe there's something nagging at him that he knows this is wrong. And of course, I think it's Matthew that tells us in his account, he knew that for envy, the chief priests had delivered him. And so he knows he's dealing with an innocent man. Then you have, he seems to have a readiness to hear Jesus. Now he kind of gets snippy with Jesus once or twice, it would seem, but overall, at least at first, he seems ready to hear Jesus. So he's kind of an interesting fellow. And at the end of the day, he allows himself to be forced into what he knows is a wrong moral decision. This is morally wrong to put to death an innocent man. He knows he's innocent, but you're going to see the cowardice, the inability to take a stand here by Pilate. Then verse 30, they're going to say, if he were not a malefactor, we would not have delivered him unto thee. We would not have delivered him up unto thee. That's interesting because they don't want Pilate to try him. They don't want a trial. They just want the go-ahead. Why are they so desperate for the go-ahead? Well, I think we've covered this before.
Well, because he is a threat to their existence. They've established that earlier.
But why fool with Pilate? Why not just go ahead and do the deed? They can't do it because they are under Roman law. Roman took away the Jewish right to carry out capital punishment. And so if someone was going to die, and believe me, Rome had no qualms about capital punishment, but Rome had to give the say-so. Somebody in charge from Rome. You couldn't just have the chief priest say, oh, here's a man, we've determined him to be guilty, we're going to put him to death. Now, sometimes they did that, and that's one of the reasons they would sometimes, run afoul of the Roman government. But Rome had to give the permission. And so that's why they're even bothering with Pilate. They play up to him. One fellow said in some notes I read that they play Pilate here. They play him like a fiddle. They play up to him, and we have a law. By our law, he ought to die. And we have no king but Caesar, and all these different things they say to placate him. But it's all about just getting the go-ahead. And so they don't want a trial. Just give us the stamp of approval. So anybody questions it, if anybody says you're in trouble for this, we can say, Pilate said so. And you know, the buck stops somewhere, right? And so they had to have somebody high enough up so that when the buck stopped, it's on a Roman authority. And basically what they say in verse 30, look, man, you don't need to know the details. Just take our word for it. I mean, look, we're good people. If he were not a malefactor, if he was not a criminal, we wouldn't have brought him to you. And again, that's one of those where you just sort of shake your head. They're not even giving the man a fair trial here, or don't want to. They just give us the stamp of approval to kill this man. They're violating their own law. And in fact, Matthew tells us about even before they go to Pilate. They're trying to bring forth witnesses as they try them before the Jews. They can't even get their stories to agree. And so they try to find false witnesses to get the 2 or 3 witnesses in their own little Jewish circles, but they can't even get them to agree. And so they find 2 people that come forward and they say, and they actually agree, this man said he would destroy the temple and build it again in 3 days. Well, obviously that was not a literal statement. Jesus was talking about the temple of his body. And John tells us that all the way back in John 2. So they've violated their own law twice, really. And so they tell Pilate, look, man, you don't need to fool with all this stuff. Just trust me. If he were not a bad person worthy of death, we wouldn't have brought him to you. Just give us the go-ahead. And so verse 31, Pilate says, well, just take him and judge him according to your law. And so they say what? It's not lawful for us to put any man to death. We can't do it. And so he says, and by the way, 32, that the saying of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spake, signifying what death he should die. That's another thing. If the Jews simply just had permission to carry it out, and you know, you take them and judge them by your law, and they carried out capital punishment, it would typically be what? Stoning. But the prophecy was, pierce my hands and feet. Jesus in John 12:32, if I be lifted up from the earth, shall draw all men unto me. And it's interesting, of course, you can go back to Numbers 21, the brazen serpent. Moses lifted up the serpent on that rod. All these pictures pointing to Jesus dying a death that is typically not how Jews would carry out capital punishment. Again, that's no accident. That's evidence of inspiration. Ordinarily, the Jews would have just stoned someone, but they're going to do this through the Romans, which means it'll be crucifixion. That's what God had said all along. So Pilate says, you just take him and judge him according to your law. He's kind of snipping back at the priests here, as if they say, trust me, if he were not a criminal, we wouldn't have brought him to you. And he says, all right, fine then. Finish what you started. Go judge him. And they say, well, you see, that's why we've come to you. Because we have a law, and by our law he ought to die, but, it's just not lawful for us to carry out capital punishment, Pilate. So we need your permission. You can almost just hear them saying, good sir, kind sir, most honorable Pilate. You can just hear all the things that they're saying to butter him up. They're playing him. And so Pilate entered into the judgment hall again, verse 33 says, and called Jesus and said unto him, art thou the king of the Jews? Is he asking this question honestly? I don't know. I was going to say I tend to doubt it, but I guess it's possible. I don't guess there's any way to say 100% for sure. It just so we know, it actually could be translated, so you are the king of the Jews, as if he's saying that. Or it may be that you can sort of see Pilate, obviously they dress differently, but we would view it as somebody kind of hands in his pocket, and here's Jesus, and so he kind of eyeballs him and says, so, you're the king of the Jews, huh? As if to say, you're the guy I've heard all this fuss about for the past 3.5 years. You're the guy. So it's you. I don't know if that's what's going on here, or if he's honestly asking, hey, are you the king of the Jews? Is that right? It would seem to me more likely that you have a man who's kind of studying Jesus, so to speak, kind of like, okay, this has not been a secret. Jesus has had massive crowds following him. Word gets back even to the Romans about this fellow going around doing these great and powerful deeds he's healing people, he's preaching, he's teaching, he's talking about a kingdom. So, kind of maybe Pilate's going, okay, so you're the king of the Jews. Anyway, we don't know that for sure, but that's the question he asked Jesus, and Jesus asks him a very polite but firm question. Are you saying this of yourself, or did someone else tell you? He says, are you saying you're... It seems to be that Jesus is kind of putting that question to him like what we were just discussing. Are you asking this honestly, Pilate, or just because someone told you? Do you really want to know the truth? Seems to be maybe what Jesus is saying there. Pilate answered, am I a Jew? Pilate gets kind of snippy here with Jesus. Thine own nation and the chief priests have delivered thee unto me. What hast thou done? And so Pilate says, look, I don't know about your laws and customs. I don't know about all that. You expect me to know all this stuff? I'm not. Your own nation, your own people have brought you to me. So he's getting a little bit testy with Jesus. But he seems also to want to get to the heart of the matter. What is going on here? Are you the king of the Jews? I've heard about this. What's the deal? So he definitely is giving attitude here, it seems. But at the same time, he wants to get to the heart of the matter. You almost just see in Pilate a man who's very conflicted. He knows this is not right, but he just lacks the fortitude or the virtue, if you want to talk about it from the standpoint we're going to look at it in our, at least look at that concept in our Sunday morning sermon. He lacks the virtue, the courage to do the right thing. Yes, sir. Maybe. There's probably a lot of stuff going on, and I don't know that we know all what's going on here, but I think there is some political fear in this account because, as you said, these people, the chief priests, they're inciting the people. So it gets to the point where it's kind of like, is a riot going to break out here? Okay, fine, take him. I'm going to wash my hands of this, and you just take him and crucify him then. If that'll settle things, settle you all down, have at it. That may very well be, fear of, and of course, like you said, there's some kind of an uprising. Word gets back to Rome. Oh, look, Pilate can't handle those Jews. We need to send somebody over there who can take care of this. We'll replace him. Brother Bill, you were going to say something a while ago? Okay. So anyway, it goes on, and he, like I said, he gets kind of snippy with Jesus, but he seems like he's conflicted here. And Jesus answers, verse 36, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now is my kingdom not from hence. In fact, they're going to, I think we already got it, but, they try to play this, he's making himself a king. He's making himself a king. So, Caesar is king, and you got to do something about that, Pilate. Caesar can have no rival. And so if this guy's claiming to be king, you need to carry out capital punishment because he can't claim to be king and not run afoul of Caesar and Rome. So they're trying to play that card. And the Romans surely will act on that, right? And now Jesus plainly tells him, my kingdom is not of this world. He says, if my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now is my kingdom not from hence. Of course, Jesus' actions in the garden proved his kingdom's not of this world, right? Peter drew the sword. He was ready to fight. Cuts off the fellow's ear. Jesus heals it and says, put your sword up, Peter. That's not what this is about. So now Jesus plainly tells Pilate, my kingdom is not of this world. You again begin to understand why Pilate is going to seek to release him. But the Jews, they're relentless. And they're not going to have it any other way. So he says, my kingdom is not of this world. By the way, we've mentioned it before, but that's a classic text for dealing with those who have the false idea that Jesus is going to come to earth and set up a kingdom, a physical kingdom here on earth. Jesus says his kingdom is not of this world. And it's not, period. It's a spiritual kingdom. Pilate therefore said unto him, Art thou a king then? I see you are a king. And Jesus answers, Thou sayest that I am a king, to this end was I born. For this cause came I into the world, that I should bear witness unto the truth. Everyone that is of the truth heareth my voice. So again, Pilate is just kind of an enigma to me sometimes when I read this, especially John's account, because he seems like he's trying to understand sometimes, and then he gets kind of testy and give an attitude. Ultimately, obviously, he's a coward. We know that, but it's kind of a confusing fella sometimes. And so Jesus says, you say I'm a king. To this end I was born. This is the cause I came into the world. I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who's of the truth hears my voice. And Pilate here, there's some debate about this next verse, verse 38, because Pilate is going to say unto him, what is truth? But, when he says this, he goes out unto the Jews again and says, I find in him no fault at all. He goes out to them. He understands now. He says he has a spiritual kingdom. Pilate may be thinking he's crazy, but he knows he's not guilty of any crime. He may be thinking, well, because for whatever reason, he may just, obviously he is lacking in faith. He's not a believer in Jesus, so he may be thinking, oh, this fellow's off his rock or whatever. He thinks he's, the king of the Jews. He's got some kind of spiritual kingdom. But he knows this man is innocent, and so he seeks to release him. But this statement, what is truth, is variously interpreted. Some people claim that, say that he was claiming truth is relative. Just what is truth? Some people say it's a wistful desire just to find out what's really going on here. But really, ultimately, the truth of the matter here is that he found no fault in Jesus. I think, if you're asking my opinion, it seems to me that Pilate is obviously he's a very secular man. He's not some kind of religious leader or spiritually minded person. So Jesus begins to talk to him. You say I'm a king, to this end I was born, for this cause I came into the world, to bear witness of truth. And everyone who's of the truth hears my voice. And you can almost hear, just picture Pilate rolling his eyes. What is truth? I think, again, if you're asking my opinion, I think he's kind of scoffing here. Like, what is truth? Is there really any truth? And isn't that what a lot of people do today even? Oh, what is truth? I could prove anything by the Bible. People make statements like that are really, really, I'm not trying to be rude. I'm just, sometimes they're really ignorant statements. Sometimes they're just really biased. Sometimes they're just malicious, trying to find a way around believing what the Bible says. But people say, oh, you can prove anything by the Bible. What is truth? The Bible's just written by men. And all these things that people will say that don't take into account the whole picture, the evidence, and that the Bible was, put to paper, papyrus, whatever, by men, but the Holy Spirit wrote it. It's inspired. And, just that mindset, what is truth? That seems to be that mindset that Pilate has here. Go ahead, Tim.
You're certainly entitled to that thought, and I'm not taking issue with that at all. However, the Bible tells us in the next chapter, chapter 19, verse 8, Pilate is fearful. And it uses a word to qualify the fear. It says in verse 8, he's more fearful. To be more fearful, you got to be fearful to begin with, and then when you learn something, you're more fearful. I don't think that Pilate is dealing with this in any way flippant. I'm not saying that you're saying that. I think Pilate is very concerned about how he deals with Jesus. And I'm going to have a comment here in just a few minutes about another issue that we're fixing to come up on, but I don't want to get into that at this point. But chapter 19, verse 8, we cannot ignore this. Pilate is fearful of Jesus and how he deals with it.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of where I get into with Pilate. He's such an enigma to me, because sometimes I look at him, I think, he really is conflicted. And if that's the case, then he may very well be saying, okay, you came to bear witness of truth. What is the truth? And it may be that he's kind of saying in this immediate situation, what is the truth here? They're saying You claim to be a king. You're rivaling Caesar. You're claiming to be the Son of God. And, it seems to me you've done nothing wrong. What's the truth here? Help me out, man. That may be kind of what he's saying. I'm trying to release you. In fact, he's going to say that later on. Don't you know I have power to release you? Help me out here. What is the truth? And so, I think it could just as easily go either way. And when I think about it like that, sometimes I think, well, that makes more sense. Man, he's a tough guy to figure out, this Pilate. Because on the one hand, he does. He seems like maybe he's trying to get to the heart of the matter. And like you said, I think he realizes, and we've said this before, you get into the presence of Jesus, and it's still true today. We don't get literally into his presence, but spiritually, you encounter him through the Word, maybe in worship in that situation. But when you encounter Jesus, you don't go away the same. You're changed. And Pilate is standing here with this man before him who is not just a man. And it does seem to leave an impact on him. And he's kind of going, I got to handle this right. And he didn't. But it does seem like that's there in his mind. And so, you may be onto something there. That's just, like I said, he's a funny fella. Not ha-ha funny, but just confusing. I mean, and honestly, may very well be that he's confused here. Seems to be the case. And so he may just be honestly asking, well, what is the truth? And so he tells the Jews, verse 38, again, I find in him no fault at all. But you have a custom I should release unto you. Will you that I release unto you the King of the Jews? And of course, they cried all again, saying, not this man, but Barabbas. Now Barabbas was a robber. Now again, other accounts tell us that the chief priests incited the crowd to ask for Barabbas. It seems that they would not have done so had they not been pushed to do that by the Jewish leaders. So Pilate takes Jesus and scourged him. Again, it seems to be maybe an effort to satisfy them. Pilate is going to send Jesus to Herod. We mentioned that. John's not going to record that, but other accounts do. Herod's going to send him back. It seems that the whole sending him to Herod was an attempt to get out of this. And that, again, would kind of go with what you were saying there, Tim. He's careful. He wants to deal with Jesus in the best possible way. But at the end of the day, he lacks the fortitude to make the right call and just say, no, he's innocent. And so, I'm going to send him to Herod. Herod said, I'm going to send him back. You can almost see Pilate going, come on, man. He wanted out of it. You were going to say something else?
You touched on chapter 19, verse 1. I have heard at Bible camps and other settings the magnitude of the scourging of Jesus. But here's something I've never heard. That the man who commissioned the scourging was afraid of Jesus. Number two, you're going to scourge a man that you say is an innocent man, understanding that the penalty for scourging if a man dies is going to come back to you. When you paint that picture, I've heard people talk about Jesus. Once he was scourged, you could see the lungs coming through the back of his skeleton. Okay, all right. If that's your position, first of all, the Bible never tells us that. We have to interject thoughts if we're ever going to get into anything other than Jesus' scourge. But you've also got to acknowledge that the Bible makes it very clear that the man who commissioned this is believing that Jesus has done nothing wrong and that he should be released. And you never hear that brought up.
Yeah. And he does. He says he's done nothing wrong, and it seems to be an effort to satisfy the people.
And the reason I bring that up, that in the upcoming verses, there's going to be some additional comments about this, but once again.
But he is also, of course, bear in mind, this is not a spiritual man, and he's not going to have any qualms about Jesus getting a good lashing. But yeah, I don't know. We know what a scourging was like, but as far as how far this went with Jesus, there was, in fact, this was mentioned at the museum we went to recently down there in LaGrange. They talk about 40, they lashed him 40 times because they couldn't go over 40. That was the law. That was not the law. That was the Jewish law. Roman law said, you go till the soldiers have had enough. I mean, they could, and it was actually, I don't know if I'd say very common, but it was not uncommon for people to die from the scourging. Some of that may be at the discretion of the soldiers. I don't know.
Was Rome in favor of scourging an innocent man?
Oh, no.
Okay.
Well,
Now that's Pilate's mind. It's got to be.
Yeah.
God has revealed that to us about Pilate. Now why God chose to do that? That's only in the mind of God.
now I will say, just to add to that thought, Rome's not in favor, or was not in favor of scourging an innocent man. But if they found out a Palestine was a vassal or a state of the Roman Empire. If they found out somebody who's not a Roman citizen got scourged, and oh, by the way, turns out he was innocent, Rome's going to go, oh well. I mean, that was kind of, that's why Paul is significant in the book of Acts. When Paul turns to the centurion and says, hey, excuse me, is it lawful for you to scourge a man who is a Roman citizen and uncondemned? And the centurion's kind of going, oh, time out, because that's a different story. But yeah, I get your point. We got to be careful how far we go with that, because it does seem Pilate is, I believe he's doing this to kind of satisfy them. My question is, once he turns them over to the soldiers, they may get after him pretty well.
Then he's coming back before Pilate again.
Yeah, I think they're not going to take him to the point of death, because he's going to come back before Pilate. And that's a good point there. Brother Bill, you were going to say something a while ago?
We see a situation here with Pilate that he really doesn't have backbone. I mean, I'm not saying that he should have had more backbone. I'm just saying this is just God's providence. This is how he ended up handling it.
He did. He lacked backbone. And, there is some providence of God there working out the overall plan. This is not miraculous, but it just so happens that here's a guy in power. He's in charge. He can give the yay or the nay, the thumbs up or the thumbs down, as we sometimes say, to the death penalty. And it just so happens it's this man who's lacking in enough backbone to stand up to the Jews. You see God's plan just in all of this. But I know we're running low on time. Let's get to a stopping point in chapter 19. The soldiers platted a crown of thorns. They put it on his head. They put on him a purple robe and said, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they smote him with their hands. So they're going to mock him, and of course he's being scourged. It does seem that when he comes before Pilate, or coming before Pilate again, they're not going to take him to the point of death. And all that's not to take away from scourging. Scourging is not something you want, period. I remember several years ago, I was a junior high, maybe high school. I think I was high school, when this young man from America, he went to, I think, was it Singapore? Y'all remember this? And he decided he was going to paint the town, literally, with some spray paint and do some graffiti. And Singapore doesn't play around with that kind of stuff. And so he was arrested, and they determined, they gave him a trial, and it was determined in the trial he's going to receive, I don't remember how many, 10 or so lashes with a cane. Oh man, America was up in arms about it. The embassy's got to step in, and they should, foreign relations and the president should step in and rescue this young man and bring him home before they should abuse him in such a way. And it was a big debate. And finally, the American government said, son, and Singapore was upset about it, and they said, you better not step in here. This is our law. He came here to our country, and he violated our laws, and our law says this is the punishment. And America finally, to the government's credit, they got it right for once, and they said, okay, you did it. You violated their law, and now you're going to have to suffer the punishment. It wasn't anything that was going to kill him, but buddy, it hurt. But scourging went even beyond that. A whipping, a whip, what we think of a bull whip, that can lay your skin open. But of course, a scourge had, sometimes it was pieces of metal, sometimes it was pieces of bone. It's not a pleasant experience either way. But as we pointed out, he's going to come back before Pilate, so they know they have to keep him alive. And so, yes, sir.
Please,
Mm-hmm.
What do they put on it? A purple robe. Now, if I understand what I've been taught in the church all of my Christian life, I understand that purple was a sign of royalty. I think this is a point to make him, quote, the king of the Jews. But the question is, would this be a inexpensive piece of cloth, or would purple imply that probably some value here to be placed on the back of Jesus after the scourging?
I don't think we could say either way. I don't know that I.
Have you ever heard that purple was a, expensive piece of cloth during these days?
Yeah. Typically. So.
That's as far as I wanted to go.
Right. Maybe. And it could have just been an old, but yeah, it may have been. But they're definitely mocking him here. You can kind of picture this taking place. Oh, look, a king's got to have a crown, and they grind that crown of thorns into his scalp. And hey, look, everybody. Of course, we know later they're going to give him a reed for a scepter. King's got to have a scepter. But give the king a robe. So yes, sir. You're going to say something, Scott?
In chapter 18, later in the chapter, he says, "My kingdom is not of this world. My kingdom is elsewhere."
Mm.
He's already told them that he's not trying to usurp his authority, and my kingdom is not here. So, but the Jews would have none of it.
Yeah, they keep using that king angle to try to get him to be crucified, and that may play into what you were saying earlier, Robert, about the fear here that this gets back to Rome, and they think I can't control these people, or if these people get up in to a big huge riot or something. But Pilate goes forth, verse 4, and he says to them, "Behold, I bring him forth to you that you may know that I find no fault in him." So Jesus, no doubt, after the scourging is a bloody mess. And at that point, it's almost like Pilate is saying, in fact, he verse 5, "Then came Jesus forth wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate saith unto them, Behold the man." And this does seem to lend toward the scourging to satisfy the people, as if, here he is. Are you not satisfied? Again, he knows he's innocent. He knows he's done nothing wrong. As if to present him before the people and say, look, he's been scourged. He has this crown of thorns. We often point out it's not like they would place it very carefully on his scalp. Don't let those thorns stick him. No, they're going to just grind it on. And so, when you get, there are a lot of capillaries and such in the head and the facial area. And so when you begin to bleed from a head wound, it's kind of like when you cut yourself shaving, it's like you think you're going to bleed out sometimes. But he's bleeding profusely. He's, no doubt he's a wreck at that point. And so Pilate says, "Behold the man." You see what, it's almost to say, you see what you've compelled me to do? Are you not satisfied now? And so the chief priests, therefore, and the officers, when the chief priests, therefore, and the officers saw him, they cried out, saying, "Crucify him, crucify him." Pilate at this point is almost like he's just exhausted, and again, for whatever reason, he lacks the fortitude, the courage. And so Pilate says, "Take ye him and crucify him, for I find no fault in him." But the Jews are suddenly so concerned about the law. Oh, the Jews say, "We have a law, and by our law he ought to die because he made himself the Son of God." Well, again, this is going to get a Roman's attention for a lot different reasons than with a Jew. Romans viewed Caesar as God. And of course, Titans were sons of the gods and all that. So it's viewed totally differently by a Roman when he says that, but it still gets their attention. And so when Pilate therefore heard that saying, he was the more afraid. So fear begins to drive Pilate's decision making. He goes again to the judgment hall, says to Jesus, "Whence art thou? Where are you from?" Or, "You come down from the gods," as if what he's saying. Of course, he's coming from a idolatrous standpoint. Jesus gave him no answer. And that's when Pilate is going to say, "You're not going to speak to me? Do you know who I am? I got the power to release you or to call for you to be crucified." And Jesus, of course, is going to point out, you couldn't have any power at all except it were given you from above. "Therefore he that delivered me unto thee hath the greater sin. And from thenceforth Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, saying, If you let this man go, you're not Caesar's friend. Whoever makes himself a king speaks against Caesar. And that did it. That's going to get Pilate to finally agree to. Oh, it's almost as if they're saying, we're going to run and tell your bosses, if you release him, that you let go a man who claims to be king, and then you're going to be in trouble. We got to stop there. That's a paragraph break, so we'll stop there and pick up, Lord willing, with verse 13. Thank you very much for the comments and participation. We'll have a break before our worship period. I have a pen.